Hey, everybody, thanks for tuning in. Max Shank with my friend Tom Swales, aka the man from Canada, the man with a plan, physiotherapist, has his own practice, has his own gym, has his own physiotherapy practice. The guy is an absolute stud. He can do backflips, and he also is a huge nerd, which is why he was the first person I thought of talking to with regard to flexibility. And we're going to try to get really precise with our language here, and we're going to make this as useful as possible for you. You do not want to miss this, or you will suffer being stiff and in pain forever. Or you'll maybe also just be totally fine. I don't know. I don't know you. Tom, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Max, for having me, man.
So, talk to me. Flexibility.
Flexibility.
Do
Well,
I need it? Is it important? Will
yeah,
it make girls like me?
depends on where you apply it, I think. I mean, with the girls thing, it's probably on the context. If you're at the bar and popping splits and doing all kinds of stuff, it might work for you. But overall, having good flexibility, we don't know per se, is it going to reduce injuries? Is being less flexible going to cause more injuries? But I think it has to do with, can I have a good balance between the quality and quantity of how we move? So, for example, if somebody has a straight leg raise of 90 degrees, which in the majority of the population, that's awesome. But for a dancer or a gymnast, it's actually a tight hamstring because their demands for doing front splits is way past 90 degrees. So they would be considered tight, and their flexibility needs to be improved upon in order to manage those
Mm.
skills.
So it's supply
Whereas
and demand.
it
The,
becomes a
de-
supply and
the
demand.
demand is too high for what they can supply
Yeah,
from that range
yep,
of motion. And
yep,
just real
exactly.
quick, the difference between flexibility and mobility, as I understand it, is flexibility is passive range of motion and
Yep,
mobility is active range of motion. I
yep,
also understand that the gap between those two is correlated with an increased incidence of flexibility. So if you have a tremendous passive range, but
yep,
a very small active range,
yep.
I believe, I mean, I've only taught a few thousand people this, so I hope I was right, that it is correlates with a greater injury risk because it means you can get somewhere that you
Yep.
can't control neuromuscularly.
Yep. Yeah. So closing that gap, and I actually looked into this. There's a correlation, but there's no causation, right? So the
With most
theory is,
things, right?
yeah. So, your active range of motion, which we'll call mobility, is, how high can I lift my leg underneath my own power against the resistance in my body and against gravity versus how far can an external source stretch that leg for me? Now, it's helpful, especially if something like martial arts where you have to kick and produce a lot of torque, or gymnastics. It's helpful to have control of that range of motion so that you don't have muscles fighting one another and potentially, tearing or straining. But on the other end is, if you've got somebody with too much flexibility with a lack of control and they get pushed into that range, they can't control it or bring it back.
Mm-hmm.
So an example would be, say, your yogi individuals who just stretch a lot, and I've seen quite a few. They
Mm.
can put their head through their legs and they can do back arches and back bends, but yeah, they got back pain, and they think I have a tight back. I'm like, well, no, you don't, because you can put your head through your legs, but what you're lacking is the ability to control your posture and your position, just in an upright position, standing all day.
Mm.
And then you have and then and then you give them some carries and some crawling and some core work, and all of a sudden their back pain goes away. So
Mm.
we've added a little bit for that individual. They're too far on the flexibility spectrum and not enough on the control strength spectrum. We had to add a little bit more strength control. They didn't lose flexibility, but at least we gave them control in some of the ranges so that their nervous system wasn't freaking out all the time for the lack of tension that they're always removing. And then you have your power lifters that are overpowered and undermobilized. They've got back pain, but it's because they can't finish through the hips. They don't get access to certain muscles, and their nervous system is also freaking out because they're overcompressed with the amount of resistance in their body. So both ends, the nervous system's protecting them and sending a signal saying something is off balance. There's too much of one thing and not enough of another. So I'm just going to light up both of your backs to make you pay attention so that you figure out why we're feeling this.
Mm. And I think it's really valuable to make that distinction that being tight doesn't mean that you'll feel pain, and also
Yep.
being strong doesn't mean that you will not feel pain. So it's about applying the correct dose of the correct medicine
Yep.
to the individual. And I've always been surprised with that one. I mean, not too surprised anymore because I've seen it happen so many times. But I remember an example somewhat recently of this lady. She came in, uh, bad back, bad knees, all that good stuff. Tons of stretching, no help, and I had her carry a 25-pound medicine ball on her stomach, like a bear hug carry,
Yep.
for like 1 minute.
Yep.
And it resolved all of her problems. It was
Right.
shocking, actually, because she was just extremely weak. She had
Yep.
no structural integrity, and there was no cueing. I just said, "Go, like carry this rock," essentially,
Yeah.
and all of those, tightness issues immediately resolved. So understanding that it's going to be a different solution for everybody, which is why it's so hard to have a one size fits all approach, even though that's what people want. Just like with nutrition, just tell me how many almonds I should eat at 9 a.m. every day. And it's like, there's more to it than that. No. So, getting that distinction between pain, mobility, and then also, I think from here, it might be helpful to talk about stretching. So
Mhm.
I was thinking about this the other day. So you can actually stretch a muscle, right? I believe it's like muscles are not actually very elastic. It's just that they slide, right? The
Yep.
filaments slide. It's not like the actual tissue is
Yep.
physically stretching. And I think it's kind of interesting to think about it this way. So it's really
Yep.
just that there's a reflex that turns things on and makes them hold while you try
Yep.
to lengthen them and they don't let go. Is that
Yep.
is that correct?
Yeah, so you've got
Actin and
you have
myosin.
actin, myosin, you have the muscle spindles that measure force and velocity, and the Golgi tendon organs that measure length and change. And when we initially stretch a muscle, that stretch creates a contraction initially, and it creates the muscle spindles to fire and then hold on. But if you wait it out long enough, it allows those actin and myosin filaments to kind of lengthen. But there will be a point where there's no more bridges,
Right.
and then all of a sudden the nervous system's like, well, if we bypass all these bridges, we might not be able to bring that back to length. So that's where tear happens.
Mm-hmm.
But if we progress stretching over time and we slide, then theoretically we can add more actin and myosin bridges and the muscles lengthen out. But then there's also more potential to produce strength in that new range
Mm-hmm.
because you have contractile components. It's the same thing as if we over contract and we shorten the muscle. And anybody who's had a hamstring spasm from bringing their leg behind them
Right.
and it contracts, the actin and myosin bridges they've overlapped potentially too much and they can't find another actin and myosin bridge, so everything just locks down,
Hmm. Yeah,
right? But if we
it's bunching.
it's bunching,
Yeah.
right? And they're looking for more things to grab onto, but they can't, so they're just all locked down. And if you create strength in that short range because you've overstretched the muscle, now you can create more actin and myosin bridges theoretically in those shorter ranges, and then you can maintain strength in the inner range.
Hold on. Did you say you can create more bridges or you can access more of the bridges?
I don't know exactly, right?
Okay.
It's kind of an idea.
Yeah.
Is if we know that stretching and strengthening, lengthening, we can create more or get access to more actin myosin bridges, then it could theoretically go in the other direction.
Hmm. So, as I understand it, it's basically you want to make sure that you can control the long side and the short side, for lack of
Yeah.
a better word. I think of it goes in to out and out to in. So let's just take the hamstrings as an example. My two
Mhm.
favorite ways to increase hamstring flexibility are single leg Romanian deadlifts.
Yep.
So you are loading the long side, and
Yep.
then a straight leg raise.
Yep.
So you're loading the short side. So being able to control both sides is paramount because you want to be able to shorten and you want to be able to lengthen while maintaining that balanced tension, which
Yep.
makes me think of the word centration, which is a fancy talk that we use to say the ball is in the middle of the socket. And that's going to allow us to get the maximum range that we could possibly get. Now, in order for those two movements to work, you need the tension relationship in your foot, ankle, and calf to be um, healthy, let's say. It needs to be that balanced
Yep.
tension again. And you also need to have a pelvis that is stabilized by your core muscles. And if it's not, then what I'd like to tell people is if one muscle or one area isn't doing the job, you're going to have the neighbors take up that slack, literally, and then
Yep.
the neighbors are going to get pissed because now your hip
Yep.
has to be abs and it can't be a hip anymore. So now you can't move your hip because your
Yep.
brain basically is like, well, it's not safe to move from an unstable pelvis. It's probably the least safe thing you could do. So
Yep.
just to really kind of get it as simple as possible, if your hamstrings are tight, unless there's actual scar tissue that is preventing the sliding of those
Yep.
filaments on those actin myosin bridges, um, you're not stretching them and they're not tight. What you're doing is you're convincing your nervous system that it is both safe and important to go to that new range. That's what I basically tell people.
Yep. That's the neurological component for flexibility, because you can override. Excuse me. If I sit in my chair all day and I bend forward and I can't touch my toes, and all of a sudden I do some deep breathing or do some eye flicking or do some canal bounces to stimulate some of those higher top-down control systems for balance and
Mm,
control, all of a sudden I can touch my toes. So I didn't stretch my hamstrings. I didn't really create any change in the anatomy or the physiology, but I did create some sense of control and stimulation in the cerebellum, which then told the spine, oh, you know what? By doing this, we actually are facilitating some of the spinal postural muscles.
mm,
And because those are better organized and better stacked, I'm going to release the tension off the hamstrings that we were once trying to use for upright posture.
right.
So we have that psychological, neurological component. And if people are in pain, psychologically that drives up the sympathetic nervous system. It's going to not allow muscles to relax effectively.
Mm,
If people have a fear of moving, their nervous system won't feel safe to allow them to move into certain ranges. And if we can kind of bypass or override a lot of that psychological and then eventually neurological downflow, then it allows more access to movement and mobility in general, and we'll call it flexibility. So now we have this window of opportunity to truly create change on a physiological level of accessing those actin and myosin bridges to allow them to lengthen and then create strength in that new range.
mm. So key with the top down, right? Like you said before, um, we had a nice chat before we started recording, per usual. I thought we were going to go the whole hour just before shooting the breeze, but we were talking about psychological, neuromuscular, and then I
Yep.
believe biological, and then finally
Yep.
mechanical or physical
Physics.
physics.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
if you have the identity of someone who's in pain, or if you feel pain all the time, you're going to feel fragile, you're going to feel stiff, you're going to feel protective. So that's going to be sympathetic nervous system jacked to the max. If
Yep.
your nervous system perceives some sort of threat, it doesn't respond to you specifically. It doesn't say, "Hey,
Yep.
Tom, this is your nervous system. We were thinking that the way you're looking at something 18 inches in front of you all day, every day, and not moving your head isn't really conducive to your visual system and your vestibular system optimizing your global movement. So we were hoping you could maybe shake your head around and look at some stuff that's further away. It
Yep.
it just suddenly your knee hurts, right? Or something gets
Yeah.
stiff. It's very unspecific, but I and correct me if I'm wrong. Your brain communicates to you in three main ways. It can make you feel pain, stiff, or weak.
Yep.
And I think that's
Yep.
basically it. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah. So pain is going to be that overcharged signal to pay
Mm-hmm.
attention. The stiffness is protective or
Mm-hmm.
guarding. It's trying to lock down and say, no, we can't move this because it doesn't feel safe or I need to protect
Mm-hmm.
something. Or you got inhibition, where muscles, the nervous system's not going to allow you access to certain muscles to produce force, because if we produce force, we might damage ourselves.
Right.
So the nervous system's primary job is don't die.
Right.
It's survival. Look for safety, avoid pain.
Totally.
It's as simple as that. And when you channel down, every single input that we're feeling and not feeling, either at a conscious or unconscious level, the nervous system's constantly evaluating: am I safe?
Mm,
Do I need to quickly run away? Do I need to retract? Do I need to freeze? Do I need to pass out? Whatever it is. So it's constantly, your brain's always looking for threats. That's just how we're
mm,
designed. And if we have an environment that feels safe, and even just the temperature of the room, if it's uncomfortable, it's going to create tightness. It's going to feel, you know what, oh, it's a little cold, I need to kind of create more muscle tension, but it doesn't feel like a completely safe place. So our environment will completely predict and dictate, the quality of our movement and our flexibility. And then if our mind is also in the right place, if you have a fight with your spouse, well, don't expect your neural output to be that great, because now you've got cognitive bandwidth that's being still stuck in the past argument, still replaying that in your head. And then now you don't have that capacity to lift the heavy weight. So
mm,
the psychology and the neurology component is such a key factor in pretty much everything we do, from a movement, pain perspective, flexibility, and just overall performance, that if we don't have that right, then it doesn't matter how much foam rolling or stretching or weights you
mm.
lift, because you can override all of that.
Yeah. So basically, your nervous system uses pain, stiffness, and weakness to protect you. Those are the only
Yep.
reasons that it would do that, because it's not good for performance. And protection is
Nope.
a higher priority, of course, than
Yep.
performance. Now, one thing I've noticed is, I've been doing this for about 17 years, and I've
Mhm.
noticed that there are stiff personalities and stiff bodies attached to them a lot. Have you noticed anything like that?
Yeah, so those are those, I call those your sympathetically driven individuals. They're typically your type A's. They're like, they talk a mile a minute, they shallow breathe, they talk, they're just always ramped up
Uh-huh.
and amped up and ready to go. They're always in that state of, I'm kind of buzzing, and I don't really, it's like they're on high alert all
Hmm.
the time. But they typically have horrible mobility because they're just buzzing. The whole nervous system's just lit up.
And they're
And
always looking for
yeah,
threats in
yeah,
inside their own mind and outside of their own mind. That's been my
yep,
experience. I was wondering. I haven't actually verbalized that to anybody, but I mean, I've worked with thousands of people, and it's it's kind of shocking how often that is the case, that there's a personality type that is associated with hyper stiffness, shallow breathing, type A-ness, and I think that would stem from a lack of acceptance of what is, which is kind of the same
yep,
as looking out for danger. I would imagine it's
yep,
desire, and desire is psychological pain. Basically, if you're into the
yep,
whole uh, Buddhist kind of Eastern philosophy type of shit, I noticed that I
yep,
changed physically when I changed mentally. Um,
yep.
pretty fast, actually. A lot of the stuff that was stiff and hurting stopped being stiff and hurting, not because I found a magic exercise, but because I chilled out a little bit.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, it's getting that mindset right, because if you have a calm mind, you have a calm
mm,
body. But if you've got a monkey mind that's constantly racing, well, that's sending signals to your whole body through the nervous system to, hey, keep jumping to the next thing, look for the next thing. We'll eventually find it, but we're not there yet. So we're going to keep hunting. We're going to keep looking for that thing until we
mm.
find it. contentment is, and I think a lot of people, a lot of driven people who struggle with contentment because they think, well, if I'm content, I'm no longer going to have that drive for the next thing or to be to my potential, which, but it's coming back into, hey, you know what? I achieved some goals today and I appreciate it, but it's having, not making it about the next thing. It's about, this long journey that we're on for a lifetime, and it's not a
Mm,
race, and there's not really any immediate need to get to that thing. As much as I want to get my course off the ground, Kylie's just like, we need to do it right. You need to,
mm.
like, it's okay. I'm like, people will be there. I'm like, I know. So, you have it. That's where it helps to have, a very logical, smart partner, who looks out for your best interests on your side line too, to save you from yourself.
Right. It's gratitude for what is contentment as
Yeah,
best as I can figure it. And it is a challenge, I think. I think the people who achieve the absolute most probably don't feel content with what is. Otherwise, why would they
yeah,
go to these extreme lengths? And who knows
yep,
why that happened somewhere along the line. Is it genetics? Is it they were just always afraid they would never be good enough? Are they trying to make their dead father proud? Like who knows? I mean,
yep,
it's really
yep,
funny how all that stuff gets wrapped up into the way that a person exists physically, and how the
yep.
psychology of it is really tied into that. So I'm glad that it's not just me noticing uh, the flexibility archetypes, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's a and they're archetypes almost from the from top
Mm,
down. Yeah, because they're stiff in their way of thinking. Sometimes there's just rigid and just overall tense in their thoughts, and that represents the body because the body is just representing your internal and external environment. Like that's posture. If my posture is all slumped forward, it's going to have effect on, it could be a representation of how I feel. I don't feel confident. I'm cold. I'm, you know, low in energy. And if I'm puffed out like this, I'm like, yeah, I'm confident. I'm
mm,
ready to go. So, but that has to do with how people are perceiving, or the nervous system is perceiving, both internal and external environments.
huge. Let's take it back. How much we talked about how much flexibility is important, and it's really just making
Yeah,
sure that you can supply the demand that you're going to put on the organism.
yeah,
And the more people I coach over 50, let's say, people all start wanting the same thing. Some people sooner than others. Some people never come around, um, but they just want to be able to walk for a long time, maybe climb up on
mm-hmm.
something and carry stuff.
Yep,
Pretty much by and
yep,
large. And, in primal athleticism, I go through the whole like crawl, climb, carry, roll, bounce, balance, and things like that, which was a response to my new idea of like, oh my God, I've been totally missing the point of what people actually want. But it's easy to get stuck. And I think of powerlifting as a good example where it's basically like a kink. And I'm not into kink shaming necessarily, but you're doing this thing that is
mm,
so crazy unnatural, and you're making a tremendous sacrifice physically in order to be able
yep,
to be a freak show, basically. And I have been and probably still am a freak show in many ways. I sacrificed a lot of uh, well-roundedness and ability just so I could hyper focus in one area. And it makes me think of the amateur's advantage, which I talk about in my
yep,
course, several courses I've done, which is, the word amateur comes from the root for love. And so if you are an amateur,
mm,
that means that you are not forced to pay the price, to pay the heavy price, of having to sacrifice
yep,
your health to do the thing. You get to just enjoy intrinsically the act of what you are doing.
yep,
And if you're a professional,
yep,
it is almost your duty to sacrifice your well roundedness to focus on that one area.
yep,
So, I don't want to pick on powerlifting or CrossFit or Olympic lifting or training with a kettlebell or whatever bodybuilding, whatever people are into. But it sort of goes back to that personal story and personal belief that if I get really good at this one thing, then I will be loved, more or less. And
Yep.
same thing with
Yep.
hustling to try to be flexible enough. You see some yogi online who can do a certain thing, and you're like, God, I want to do that thing. And then you just hammer away at
Yep.
stretching before thinking, like, well, maybe this won't give me the satisfaction that I see at the end of the rainbow. Maybe this
Sure.
is not the pot of gold that I
Right.
envisioned. And how often is it really? Like, it's
Right.
crazy. I mean, I think about it myself. I used to be so sure that if I had big muscles, bumpy stomach, that girls would love me. I would finally be loved if I lifted enough weights and I had, you know, the right bulging muscles in the right places. And
Yeah.
it's such a short-sighted and superficial way of looking at things. And so I
Yes.
encourage people to project into the future what they actually are hoping to achieve by basically becoming a professional at one of those given kinks, whether you want to get super flexible, squat 1 trillion pounds or something like that. It's
Yeah.
it's a really high price for probably not the the love, power, and attention, in that order. Love, power, attention. That's what people want. If you can't get love, you'll settle for power. If you can't get power, you'll settle for attention. Look at anything that people post on the internet. They're looking for one of those three things.
Yep.
I can pretty much guarantee it.
Yep.
Uh, I pride myself on being a dream killer, because there's nothing that will help someone more than killing a dream that will ultimately leave them unsatisfied, because it takes away
Right.
all this potential for them to play. And I am going to bring it back to
Yep.
flexibility here, because you put someone in an environment where they can play. Wow, sometimes their flexibility shoots through the roof. Their mobility, I should say. I was working with this lady, probably 300 pounds, and when I would have her bend over or do a squat, she would say, it hurts. I can't do that. And I'm like, okay. And we did a
Yeah.
bunch of stuff, no real work. And finally, I started swinging a stick at her. Now, I told her before I did this what I was going to do. I didn't just suddenly start swinging a stick at her. And I just said,
Yep.
avoid the stick. And I started out really slow. And within minutes, she's rolling around, she's watching everything.
Yep.
And now that it's a game, there's suddenly no problem bending over, squatting, rolling over on the floor. And so I really
Yep.
think bringing it back to the intrinsic enjoyment of the activity, and not
Yep.
turning mobility or flexibility into a competition that you can win, or just turning it.
Just or even just a chore for that thing you have to
Yeah,
do
you
at the
don't
end
have
of
to
working out.
stretch. Besides, we learned that you're not stretching
No.
anyway. You can't stretch muscles. All you can do is
Right.
slide muscles, right?
Yep.
Uh, anyway,
Yep.
that's I'll get off my soapbox now. What would you like to add to that?
Yeah. It comes back to uh, how we're originally designed. Is It's not linear. How we're organized and structured biologically. There's an order in which we all have to do it so that pieces are in the right places. But when it comes to watching my kids play, my son squats everywhere. Like he stands up on a table and he's in a full squat and he's playing with toys. The kid they naturally sit on the ground. He's doing back bends. He's crawling. He crawls more than he likes to walk, just because he likes, and he climbs stuff. But his spine and his body is still super supple. My daughter, who's quite tall, she's getting more. She's very powerful, and because she doesn't, what I'm noticing is she doesn't crawl around as much as she used to. She's starting to get a little stiff. And it's not that she doesn't have the capability of doing it. She's doing back bends and all these other things, but she can't squat to a full depth. But she doesn't play
Mm-hmm.
down there either. My son, he's always in that squat position playing Legos and engaging with things, and he stands up and he goes back down. And with her, she'll sit on the floor. Her hips move great, and there's flexibility. But she's not using the squat as much as he's doing it. So there's no cognitive or there's no play component
Mm,
with that movement. So if you tag on something enjoyable with a particular
mm.
position, then you have the potential to make the nervous system get really, really happy and start to unlock that movement potential, because now it's going to associate, oh, this body position or this shape that we're making leads to feeling really good, both emotionally, psychologically, and physically. So now you start unlocking the nervous system, and it's not because you held the stretch for a length of time. It's probably because you added some enjoyment and some happiness in that position that now the brain is
So it's
associating
safe
that
and
with.
it's fun, basically. Safe and fun.
Safe and fun. Yep.
You know, I don't really have people do heavy squatting anymore, except with a sandbag. That's about as heavy as I ever have people go. If you can hold it in front of you, you'll probably be able to do some sort of
Yep.
squat hinge hybrid that looks really nice and feels really good. But I think squatting is much more appropriate for resting and pooping more than anything else. It's not really a practical lifting position, and I don't actually
No.
understand. I mean, I do understand why it gets so much attention because it looks really impressive, right? You know, you got a bar on your back and, uh, but
Yep.
I don't know. You have
It's not.
it seems unnatural, right?
Yeah, especially with the bar on the back, because nowhere, our ancestors never put anything on their back and then just kind of squat up and down. They'll put something,
Mm,
they'll pick something up, and if they have to use a squat pattern to get
mhm,
low enough, they will. But mostly it's a hip
yeah,
hinge that they pick something up and then they
yeah,
carry it someplace and then they put it down, because biologically it's not an effective way for survival or a good use of energy to
right,
repeatedly go up and down. You need to pick up the thing, move it to another location, put it down, and do the thing
right.
that you're supposed to do. That is right. You got functional versus practical. Functional is, well, you're performing a movement that it looks like it will carry over to something else, but we're kind of practicing that pattern. But when it's practical, a deadlift, for example, I'm going to pick it up and then I'm
Right.
going to walk it someplace and then I'm going to put it down. So the carry
Mhm.
is the practical component and the deadlift is the functional component. But if you want to measure flexibility, I bet if you pick up that thing, walk it, 20, 30 meters, and then do a toe touch, that's probably going to do more for your flexibility than doing repeated deadlifts, even though you're kind of stretching the hamstrings and
Mm,
lengthening out that pattern, because you created a ton of stability, a ton of compression, a lot of reflex stabilization, dissociation of the hips, and a
mm,
relaxed neck, right? So we had to posture up to perform that walk because you're on single leg balance for a period of time and you're moving forward. So the nervous system really had to organize that more complex thing of carrying than just the standing still and picking the thing up.
mm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I
Context and practicality, I think, has more play in how we move, quality of movement, than kind of performing these functional pattern lifts, which are fine, which are good, because we need to teach people how to do that before they do the more complex thing, because kids pick stuff up before they
Yeah, we
carry
have
it.
all of these invisible lines that we draw around what a good exercise is, what a bad exercise is. Like the height of a barbell is quite arbitrary, and then you ask someone to
Yep.
pick up a sandbag off the floor, and they got to reach a hell of a lot lower. And so
Yep.
all of the deadlifting you've been doing with a straight bar isn't really gonna get you as low as you need to lift up something
Yep.
off the actual ground, which is super practical, being able to lift something up off the ground. I mean,
Yep.
I've coached
Yeah.
people, um, 85 plus years old, and it's one of those getting up and down off the ground and being able to carry stuff seem to make your life shrink a lot. Um,
Yep.
and there's this feeling of powerlessness associated with I can't carry stuff anymore. I mean, I'd go over,
Yep.
he'd be like, "Hey, can you grab that box for me?" And it's a 1 pound box on the floor, but he can't pick it up, he can't carry it.
Yep.
Uh oh, really, really powerless feeling. So, yeah, that was the interesting thing about squatting. It's mostly for resting I think it is a good expression
Mhm.
of whether you're flexible enough. Probably deep
Yeah.
multi-directional lunging where you return, where you can, jump in and out of it is a little more practical. But like you said, I like the economics way of looking at it, which is you basically just need to be able to supply the demand. Whatever your demand on the organism is, you
Yep.
need to be able to supply it. In my
Yep.
case, I play a lot of tennis. That's currently my favorite thing. I've done a lot of other stuff. I did Highland Games, uh, Muay Thai, uh, Jiu-Jitsu. I've tried all kinds of stuff, and tennis is currently my favorite thing. So I really need to be able to um, move quickly, rotate quickly, lunge,
Mhm.
reach,
Yep.
coordinate a harmonious swing of a racket. I call it long range sword fighting, basically, where you don't have to hit each other. You get to have this ball be the conduit for a slashing sword fight. So
Yeah.
that's a much higher level of athleticism than is required to just live well. And the truth is, there are a lot of people who
Yeah.
basically live in a wheelchair who that's
Yeah.
what they do, and that's fine. So, from a pure practicality standpoint, you don't really need to be flexible or athletic at all. It just reduces your options that are
Mhm.
available to you. And if you have
Yeah.
things that are
For sure.
fun, you'll do more of it. And if you play, there's
Yep.
all that stuff psychologically, emotionally, nervous system that comes along with it. So having
Yep.
mobility or athleticism, which is really just mobility plus speed and coordination, right? Um,
Yep.
it just
Yep.
opens doors for you. And it's not really
Yep.
necessary beyond like walking and bending over to pick something up. Like we don't really need it because we're so up in our heads. We use our brains to like forecast
Yep.
years into the future and be like, "Oh, what's my 401k doing?" and all that stuff. Like you don't really need to go kill a deer. At least right now,
Yeah.
things could slingshot around to more of that, but for right now, you don't really need it. So it's all
Yeah.
just for fun, mostly, beyond being
Yeah.
able to walk really far and
Yeah.
carry stuff, which is still pretty practical.
Yeah. Yeah. And building on that, the more mobility you have, the more options you have. A lot of very smart people are saying, well, if you improve your VO2 max, it'll reduce, increase overall longevity and all cause mortality. That, you lift heavy things, you move quickly, but if you can move with complexity, that's going to create more neurosynaptic changes because your brain's trying to figure out new pathways on how to coordinate. So if you're doing like,
Mm,
you know, cartwheels, and so you're going from this standing position to an inverted
hmm
side roll into a handstand and then back on. Your brain's got to work a lot harder doing that than probably picking something up that you've done 1,000 times, because the complexity just went up and the safety is actually gone down, because there's always that
mm,
fear of, well, what if I fall on my head? But if you practice that enough times, now you can get creative, because if I can do cartwheels, well, now I can do round offs. Well, if I can do round offs, I can do a round off back tuck. Well, if I do round off back tuck, I can go into an Arabian. So it's just like any other skill. The better you are at it, the more options you have and the more creativity you can create, which will then in turn, well, our brain's going to
mm.
get bigger and more efficient because you're doing something more complex than just standing up and down from a squat.
And it'll help your cognitive function too, right? I mean, there
Oh
is
yeah.
something to be said about getting your overall skeleton big and strong, which is really the case for the deadlift, previously called the health lift.
Health
That
lift, yeah.
makes a good case for grabbing a heavy sandbag and taking it for a little walk. That'll get your
Yep.
structure dialed in.
Yep.
There are also advantages to being able to juggle and play music and walk barefooted really far and climb a tree rather than do pull-ups. I mean, I couldn't tell you the last time I did a pull-up. I just don't find it fun. This is a funny thing. I never
Yep.
liked exercising. I realized this the other day. I only liked dominating other people physically. It's 100% true. It took me many years to come to this realization, but I remember like I'll watch these old videos where I'll do like burpees and battling ropes for 20 straight minutes. I'm like, that's not fun at all.
No,
I
not fun
just
at
want
all.
to have good enough conditioning that I can punch the other guy in the face and he doesn't punch me in the face. You know what I'm saying? So I isn't that a funny revelation? Is like I really didn't like what I was doing for exercise. I just
Yeah.
wanted to boost
The
up my
outcome.
power level so I
Yeah.
would dominate. I would win, right? So it was all just to win.
Yeah.
Nothing intrinsic about it. I want stronger hands. I want stronger back. I want stronger legs. I want to jump higher, run faster. None of it was for the intrinsic fun of it,
No.
which is hilarious when you think about it. I mean, I really I invested so much time and attention
Mhm.
into that without really ever enjoying the process. And so it was always like paying a toll,
Yeah.
um, which I was happy to pay because winning was so monumentally important.
Yeah.
Um,
It's interesting because I never had that. That wasn't always my motivator. My motivator was I like to see my progress in something,
mm,
right? Whether it's handstands, muscle ups, or some kind of individual endeavor. I always competed against myself, and as even playing soccer, if we lost, but I had a phenomenal game, I was good. Like it's a little selfish because we lost as a team, but I knew that I played my best. Then I was okay. It's always better if we won, of course, but I would be happier knowing that I stopped 30 shots and let two in and we lost 2-1 than if we won 3-0 and I played shitty and we just happened to win.
I would rather our opponent's bus get a flat tire and we win by default and not even play. I'd be like, we win.
It's just like doing cold plunges. Nobody likes doing it, but I like the after effects. I feel so good after getting out of the cold tub. Because
Uh-huh.
people's like, why do you do that? It's so uncomfortable. Yeah, but the comfort and the feeling that you get after lasts way longer than the 5 minutes I suffered just a little bit. But I also proved to myself that I could do it.
Mm.
So, training for me and working out, I always get that. Kylie knows if my mind's going astray and I'm getting agitated, she's like, you need to go work out now. Because when I come back, I'm a totally different person. I'm like, all right, I have my head clear. I have the solution to this.
Totally. You have to get out and get your body moving if
Yeah,
you want to be healthy.
yeah, regardless.
Mentally, personality, psychologically, just your demeanor overall.
Yeah,
I won't be very nice if I'm super sedentary, and I'm sure
oh
that a
yeah,
lot of other people are the same. I'm sure I'm not the only one that way.
yeah.
Mm,
That could account for a lot of the grumpiness in the world,
no question. I mean, what could
right?
be less
Things are
healthy than staying inside all day? I can't
yeah,
think of anything less healthy than that. Of course, people are going to
yeah,
be lashing out. And, I used to think other people were evil, basically, but people are just acting out on whatever trauma they're experiencing, right? And
yeah,
you don't want to excuse people's
no,
behavior. You don't want to be like, oh, I guess that behavior is fine. No, it's not. But you can at least understand and have compassion and realize that person is acting from his lizard brain.
yeah,
He hasn't. So I say, secure the lizard, love the mammal, so you can free the wizard. It's like my little brain thing.
yeah, yeah,
And if you don't feel safe, you're in lizard mode. If you don't feel
yeah,
loved, you're stuck in that mammalian brain striving. But if you feel
yeah,
safe and loved, boom, you get this like neocortex, third eye. You can
yeah,
plan, you can move, you can groove, you can like dance, be an exuberant little dancing monkey, and things go really well for you. Man, I remember that was another turning point athletically I had as I started taking African dance classes with this lady, and
yeah,
she was like 62 or something. And this lady could fly around on the floor. It was some of the best training I've ever done. It was so fun. There was a drummer there,
yeah,
and I believe they were a couple, if not married. I can't remember. But this lady could just fly around the floor, jump and stomp barefooted. Ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I was thinking, oh my God, I've spent all this money to be taught how to lift weights by cripples. Like, what the fuck was I doing? I mean, what the hell was I doing? It was so, I was like, oh, never, never again. I won't do it again. It's like, I'm learning how to be fit from people who can't dance, fight, or play. I'm like, there is a
Yeah.
serious, serious problem with that.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and
Because
since,
really, like what coming back to functional versus practical. If you can't, if your only functionality is just picking something up and putting it down, but you can't defend yourself,
mhm,
you can't help carry somebody out of a burning building, or you can't jump over something, then what's the point? Like, because your movements and how well you move should dictate the practicality and your usefulness as a human being at the end of the day. We don't kids squat because they don't squat to squat. They squat to stand and then stand and walk and run.
mhm. Yeah, if you can't move
So
around, you better be at least as useful as Professor
yeah,
Xavier. The X every X-Man needs to have some sort of utility, and if you can't move around
right.
very well, you have to be some sort of psychic, telekinetic
Yeah.
something or other, right?
You got to get in people's heads.
Uh, and so I think moving to longevity then, I think there's so much mythology about what will make you live longer because what's a better headline than this will make you live a long time? And if you read a ladies magazine, the secrets to living a long time are red wine and chocolate, obviously,
Right.
because ladies already like red wine and chocolate. And hey, let's make them feel good about those choices. We'll teach them the word resveratrol. They'll continue doing what they've been doing. They'll feel a little bit
Yeah.
better about it. Probably won't move the needle at all, but everyone will be happy with the situation. And there are so many elements that come to longevity. Probably the biggest one is don't be too heavy,
Right.
regardless of whether it's muscle or fat. Just don't be too
Yep.
heavy. And have friends,
Yep.
um, and like keep moving. It doesn't even have
Move
to
a
be
lot.
anything crazy. It could be walking.
Nope.
You can walk around.
Yep.
You can walk a mile to the shuffleboard court, hang out with your friends, go back,
Yep.
not eat too much, and you might live a very long time. If you're
Yep.
enjoying doing that, you're not stressing yourself out. So I think it really gets overstated by those who have a stake in the game, like sarcopenia, for example. I'm like, look at all the people
Yeah.
who live a really long time. None of them are buff. It's just that, it's
No.
just that these buff guys learned the word sarcopenia, and they're like, your
Yeah.
muscles are going to waste away and you're going to die. And it's like, well, I don't know if that's actually true. I think it's more about whether you're weak and
Yeah.
uncoordinated and too heavy
Yeah.
for your structure. So I think, usually, unless you're trying to get flexible or mobile to do fancy tricks, which more power to you. I'm not into kink shaming. A lot of people think that it will make them live longer or less painfully, right? They're trying to protect themselves orthopedically, pain wise. And so if that is in fact the goal, just a little dose will do you. Just a little dab will do you. It doesn't require very much to live a long time. And don't get trapped into this idea that you need to do like a checklist of 1,000 things to live a long time. I'm telling you, just don't eat too much, move around, and have friends and connect with people. The rest of it, just don't stress yourself out. And if you're trying to satisfy some arbitrary metric that some clever folks like us made up for you, flexibility wise, I don't know if it's really that valuable. So
Yeah.
there are some things that can really help depending on your situation, but it's going to be a case by case basis in
Yeah.
terms of flexibility for longevity. You don't need to be a yoga master. You don't need to do dance, kick, backflip, something or others. It's cool if you can. I personally find that sort of thing very fun, but just a little bit goes a long way when it comes to mobility.
So much like movement and flexibility demands and contextual demands for overall life, it's creating balance in your life is what I basically took from that.
Yeah, balance is probably the ultimate, isn't it?
Yeah, creating balance.
Mm,
So, um, coming back to specialization, like you said, you have to sacrifice stuff. And we have friends who are extremely financially wealthy, but they've sacrificed family,
mm,
and people who, like the more you specialize in something, the more you're going to leave other stuff behind.
mm,
And if that's what you want to do, great. If your goal is to get paid to do that thing, then you have to specialize. But creating balance both in your life, both mentally, physically,
mm.
emotionally, is going to lead to a happier nervous system, which will then give you greater potential for movement and moving forward. But uh, yeah, like it comes back to the
Balance.
feeling of safety and enjoyment and balance.
And balance is very much about safety. Balance is a
Yep.
foundation that you can move from powerfully. Balancing on
Yep.
one leg is a big part of what I work with people on now. There are so many things that you can do from balancing on one leg. And frankly,
Yep.
almost everything athletic you do is going to be some sort of asymmetrical stance. You're
Yep.
if you're balanced exactly the same on both feet, it's kind of a weird position to be in, actually.
But you can't move from that,
Well, you
because
can.
if you're perfectly balanced, that's
Well,
stationary,
you can, like,
right?
um,
Yeah. Move free.
in the art of peace, they say that the stance, it's from Aikido, the stance should be
Mm.
triangular. And I did fencing for
Yep.
a while, and I'll be
Yep.
damned if your stance is not like a triangle. You cannot move forward or backward. You can only move one way, and you
Yeah.
want to be able to move both ways. But what I'm saying is, it's never going to be really evenly biased. It's going to be a back and forth kind of cycling from one foot to the other. So you're
Yeah.
always going to be biased onto one leg.
Yeah.
And yeah, like we said, I think we can wrap it up there and say that balance is likely more important than mobility or flexibility. And
Yeah.
also, I think it's wise to remind people, don't be greedy for range of motion. It needs
Yeah.
to be safe and important to have it. Just like trying to get big muscles, it needs to be safe and important to have those big muscles, which means you need to supply with enough nutrients, and you need to have a significant enough demand to warrant that metabolic rent. And
Yeah.
yeah, so don't be greedy for mobility, and don't be greedy for muscles either. Let those things be what they are, which is a byproduct of the balance in your life.
100% agree.
Uh, well, Tom, you rock, dude. Where can people find you? What do you have going on? That was awesome. I feel like I did a lot of ranting, but I think we brought it in for a
Okay.
smooth landing.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes I'm your therapist, where I just let you go off on these rants, but they always have pearls of wisdom in there, so I'm okay to let them fly a little bit.
You're not the first one to say that I
So,
need a therapist, but go on.
so people can find me. We have a new certification coming out. It's called the Advanced Movement Therapist Certification. That is actually launching this week. Tomorrow, we're doing a soft launch for 50 clinicians at a very reduced rate, and then full launch coming up in January. And that's at amtcertified.com. You can reach me on my Instagram, which is swales.tom, or YouTube, which is Tommy Swales. I put lots of free videos out there on how to self assess, correct orthopedic issues, as well as improving performance.
Sweet. Can you go through the
So,
course if you're not a clinician, or this is clinicians only?
no, I designed this course as a framework to build either your movement practice or your clinical practice. So right now we're speaking out to the physiotherapists and the chiropractors and whatnot. But even as strength coaches, you can do a full movement assessment. You can do neurological scans, muscle testing. There's no hands-on component. There's no manual
Cool.
therapy. So if you don't have manual therapy skills or a license to kind of touch or do
Hmm.
manual therapy, this course is still applicable, because a lot of the tests you're using are active based, And then we're doing a lot of upregulation or downregulation. We go into breathing patterns, we go into cerebellar assessment, and we get into ballistics. So we get into running mechanics, we get into kettlebells, we get into lifting weights. So the first half is very assessment based, looking at these active orthopedic tests organized in a specific way to make more sense of the information so that you can better streamline your treatment approach or your movement therapy approach on the back end.
Sweet. Strength coaches, personal trainers, doctors,
Yep.
wizards. Learn from Tom. He's the man. I think it'll be fun and well worth it. You can find me, maxshank.com. If you liked this, elasticity and primal athleticism will get you some of the qualities that we were talking about. Look forward to a new project coming soon. And you can find me at maxshank also on any of the social media stuff. I've been off for like 3 or 4 years, and it was really nice. But I'm gonna come back and give it a test drive as well. So thank you guys for listening. And if you have any questions or have any ideas for what you'd like to see next, I will read the comments on this video. Normally, I do not read the comments, so I will read the comments here. So if you have something you'd like to say, go ahead and drop a comment. And yep, that's it. Thanks for tuning in, and have fun with your practice, guys. See you later. Bye, Tom. Thank you, brother.
All right. Thanks.